Well, welcome. Well, those who are viewers of Sky Thoroughbred Central will certainly recognise the man in the picture behind me. It's Gavin Carmody. Of course, Gavin being the brother of Group 1 winning jockey Craig Carmody. Gavin also spent a number of years at 2GB with Alan Jones's breakfast show before switching over to Sky Thoroughbred Central. But what you might not know about Gavin is they say he has shares in Estee Lauder. Well, you'll be surprised at the answer when I sat down with Gavin this week to talk about his wonderful career, both with 2GB and Sky Central. Gavin Carmody, thank you for spending some time with me.
Steve, it's my absolute unbridled pleasure, my friend.
Now, this must be a role reversal. You're usually the one interviewing, but now it's been reversed.
I tell you what, I didn't ever think I'd be on debut, but if I was ever going to have even a barrier trial, I'd want you as the starter, Steve. It's great to be here.
That's very kind of you, Gav. Gav, let's go back. You come from a fairly big family with 3 brothers and 1 sister.
Yep.
And of course, your brother Craig, Group 1 winning jockey. Was there ever a thought that you might be a jockey?
Yeah, and then I discovered the fridge and the pantry and just about everything else. And then, of course, height got to me. But one thing I don't think I've ever said this, I'm actually frightened of horses. Not frightened in the sense that I don't want to be around them, but I don't want to be nipped by them, or, double-barreled. Yeah. So that was never going to be a problem in terms of riding because I was going to be too tall and too heavy anyway. But certainly it was going to be somewhere in racing that I ended up, and thankfully that happened.
Yeah, well, that's the ironic part about your family. 3 brothers, and you're all involved in racing. So how did that come about?
Well, Craig virtually got the ball rolling. He became an apprentice at a fairly young age, sort of 14, 15, down at Canterbury. And from that, my brother Greg became the racehorse manager, the track manager at Canterbury, and has been there, I would say, 35 years, maybe longer. And in terms of the media, my oldest brother Robert's been at Channel 9 for probably 30 years as well. With the current affair, he's been the chief of staff there for a long time. So whilst I could never start a mower to save myself, so managing a track, was out of the question. I was going to be too tall and too heavy to be a jockey. I thought, righto, I want to get into media somehow, and that was the avenue that I pursued.
Okay, so how did your pathway lead to 2GB and working with Alan Jones?
Yeah, they were great years. I always watched, racing and always watched sport and that sort of stuff. And first job I wrote a letter to Prue McSween, who was at that stage a panellist on a show called Beauty and the Beast. And I was infatuated by, the lights and the television and all that. And so I wrote her a letter. And Prue was good enough to answer me. She gave me some work experience at her PR office at Edgecliff in Sydney. So I get the train, the bus to Burwood, get the train to the city, jump off, get the train to Edgecliff. Where I got to start with Prue, and then eventually Prue got into radio when Zamanik left 2UE the first time, and she was doing nights, so I worked on her night talkback show with her, and she was just a great lady, great fun to be around, and connected so brilliantly with her audience and was so bubbly. And after Prue left 2UE, it was a bit of a merry-go-round. I spent a short time with John Laws, very short time with Mike Carlton, and then I produced weekends for Malcolm T. Elliott for 12 or 18 months. And then the opportunity after Jones left 2UE to go to 2GB came up, and I jumped at it to work those pretty tough hours where we started at 4 o'clock in the morning. They weren't easy, Steve.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, you told me a great story a couple of minutes ago about the role reversal you had with Alan Jones, and of course the first time you got to interview him when you went to Sky. Tell us that story.
Well, Steve, I'd been there, of course, 10 years and then moved over to Sky, and I'd probably been there for 6 or 7 years. And there was an opportunity one day at one of the tracks where I saw him on course where I was working, and I thought I just was never going to let this opportunity pass me by. So I called him over and I'd done the intro. The legendary broadcaster is here, and I just looked at him and said, "Gee, it's good to have you on my program." And he looked at me and said, "Gee, you've waited a long time to say that, haven't you?" And I had, and I savoured every bit of it, I can tell you.
Oh, brilliant. So you move on from Alan Jones to another legend of media, Gary Harley. Of course, you and him are just like chalk and cheese.
Complete polar opposites,
Yep.
Steve. And I suppose that's why it worked with Gaz, I had known who Gary was, as everybody did. But working with him, I didn't know what to expect. I love that Gary's unpredictable. that there was no filter, there was no censor, there was no tact. He's the most unsubtle person you could ever meet, and I love that about him. And he's always had this wonderful ability to make people laugh, and he's a very endearing bloke that everyone likes. And it worked with Gaz, particularly when we were on track, because I was always of the view, Steve, that what Harley was allowed to get away with by other people, I was not going to let him get away with. And I think that's why it worked. And he wasn't, axiomatically, he wasn't used to somebody correcting him with all of his hunter greatness, and that's why it worked. And of course, we've become great friends over probably the last 10 years or so, particularly.
Yeah. So Harley is not hard to miss, of course.
Yes, the man that ate Maitland, aptly named, Steve.
And you told me a story about crossing the road, going to lunch with him one day.
I just moved up and didn't know a soul in Maitland. So Harley took me under his wing, as he invariably did. So he said, right, I'll pick you up on the Tuesday. Anyway, we go to the East Maitland Bowling Club, who were famous at that time for having an all-you-can-eat Chinese. And, Harley, like the McDonald's all around town, had a gold pass. So Harley's driven. Well, that was the first terrifying experience that I ever had in Maitland. We're sitting in the passenger seat with him behind the wheel. And we pulled up opposite the East Maitland Bowling Club. And they're doing some roadworks. There's a bloke there on a stop and go in his high vis. Anyway, you all right, mate, come through. So over we stroll. As we've got to the stop and go, the blokes looked at him and gone, are you Gary Harley, the man that ate Maitland? Anyway, I've looked, and Harley's looked at me and said, get used to it, kid. It happens everywhere I go up here. And I thought, oh, what have I got myself into up here?
Of course, there was another experience that you had to deal with when someone invited you to the Jets.
Well, I didn't know that Newcastle had, whilst I was into sport, I didn't really realise that Newcastle, I knew they had the Knights, everyone knows the Knights, I didn't realise that the city had its own soccer team. And anyway, I hadn't been up here long, and Harley's introducing me to everyone, got to know Andrew Gibbons. Anyway, went on to MC's wedding. And Gibbo says to me, I'll show him round. He said to me, I'll take you to the Jets one night. Anyway, unbeknownst to me, I rang Harley on the way home. He goes, how'd you go with Gibbo? I said, oh, good. I said, people up here, I think, really, their idea of fun, mine might be slightly different. What do you mean? I said, well, he's asked to take me to the Jets. I thought, why do I want to sit alongside the tarmac at Williamtown and see planes take off and others land? Is this what people do up here for fun? And, excluding Harley's colourful language, he in no uncertain terms told me that they were in fact the soccer team and that we weren't going to watch the RAF planes take off from the tarmac.
Oh, seriously, great stories. Now, also involved in racing, you've owned a few horses over the years.
Yeah.
With much success? Had any
a lot
success?
Of slow ones.
Yeah,
a lot of slow ones.
We all have those.
Yeah. One of the first horses I went into, great friends with the Kellys from the Avon Park, and they brought a South African Golden Slipper winner over here called Delago Deluxe. It was going to be the next big thing, and of course, first season sales, they're all through the roof, so we jumped in. And anyway, so I've managed to, on not much money at the time, managed to get into this syndicate. And well, anyway, she trialled poorly, but they brought her here for a first race start. So I thought, I want to get a real opinion of this horse. So we got Robert Thompson to ride. Anyway, Robert's come back. She's been beaten furlong. And I thought, anyway, Robert very politely has said, she might need a bit of time, this one, very delicately saying it. He grabbed me and he said, that is the slowest thing. He grabbed me by myself. That is the slowest thing I've ridden in 20 years. So that was my introduction to horses. And there have been a few others from that. Hit the Target was a good horse for us with Stephen Jones.
Didn't he win a Kempsey Cup?
He won a Kempsey Cup. He won a Parks Cup. He won a Soldier Saddle at Bathurst. He ran second in a Tamworth Country Championship qualifier. He was a horse that we paid $20,000 for off Jerry Harvey. And he won 9 races and about 450-odd thousand. He was a lot of fun. And then in more recent times, Steve, the $100,000 Minari horse with Gerald and Sterling, Green Shadows, who won a Golden Cup not long ago and is now in the Big Dance. Yeah, which was a huge thrill just to win a listed race anywhere, let alone be in a $3 million race.
So have you got any others coming along? Any young horses?
I've got some interest with good friends with Sean Driver from Corinda Bloodstock. and he's got a couple with Matt Dale and Nathan Doyle, so that I've got small interests in. But you don't need to have a big share to have a lot of fun.
No.
You probably, unless you get a Winx or a Black Caviar, if you're there to make $1 squillion, you're not going to. But just to have a great day out with your mates, even with a scintilla of a tail of a horse, you can have a lot of fun, and that's why I do it.
Well, we all dream of finding a Winx, and that's why we're all in it. You buy a ticket in the lottery, and it's the only way you get any chance of winning.
Yeah.
But I always say to people, don't expect to enter into horse ownership and make $1 million, but expect to have a bit of fun, and that's exactly what
everyone does.
Exactly.
And whether you win a Parks Cup, a Kempsey Cup, or a class, a Wallabadar benchmark 50, you still have a lot of fun.
Yep. Now, you, like me, Gav, have watched a number of races over the years. Yeah. Who do you reckon is the best horse that you've ever seen?
In my lifetime, it would be that I've seen live would be Winx. Which is the obvious one. The greatest thrills that I've ever had at the racecourse were watching my brother Craig ride Group 1 winners, and obviously Intergaze was the horse that put him on the map. And when he wins that Queen Elizabeth Stakes, defeating Octagonal at his last race ride, and that morning Craig was so confident, that if he was in front of the Big O, he could beat him, and he got the split. And of course, Craig had come back and pelted with cerise-coloured donuts and all of that sort of stuff. And I think Tappy said in the call, Intergaze spoilt the party, and he did. Yeah. But he got our party, so I can tell you, because that was a great celebration.
Well, he's probably recognised as a regular rider of Intergaze, but he rode another smart horse called Stylish Century.
He did, and I think won a Spring Champion Stakes on Stylish Century.
Yep.
I think the great horse potentially would have been the greatest horse he ever rode was Angst, and that was a travesty. I mean, Steve, as you will know, only 2 horses ever won the Princess Series. Samantha Miss for Chris Lees, and Craig rode Angst, the Silver Shadow, the Furious, the T-Rose and the Flight Stakes. And Noel Mayfield Smith trained her. Unfortunately, they found her deceased in a box not long after the Flight Stakes, and whilst what she accomplished, I think she got beat in a Wellington Boot at the first start, but then won that Princess Series, was probably potentially the greatest horse that Craig ever rode. You'd have to ask him, but on Exposed, on what they did, 7 Group 1s on Intergaze, and Stylish Century was a great horse that he rode, but potentially Angst might have been the best that never eventuated.
Without a doubt. And had the owner of Stylish Century not been as erratic as he was, Craig probably could have had to ride in the Victoria Derby. I mean, Kevin Moses rode Stylish Century, but that would have been the next race on from the Spring Champion Stakes in that year. So I'm not sure why Craig didn't ride it in the Derby, but anyway. So taking Craig Carmody out of the next question I've got for you, Jockies. Obviously, Craig's your hero.
Yep.
Who else would you have admired in your time at the track?
In a riding perspective, Darren Beeman was probably one of the greatest I've seen. And there've been so many. I mean, Steve, as you know, I think that era was the great era.
Without
Dittman, Dye, Cassidy brothers, those Kevin Moses, those jockeys, that room was unbelievable. The room now is unbelievable, but to think what it was like back then, Beeman would have to be one of the greatest. Shane Dye was great, and he was wonderful for theatre, wasn't he?
He was.
Shane Dye was not afraid to have an opinion, and whether you liked him, loathed him, or disagreed with him, you listened to him. But Beeman, just a gentleman, a great man to be around, and just a hell of a jockey.
Oh,
a hell of a jockey.
Without a doubt. I remember the comment that Bart Cummings said to him when he said he was going to retire from race riding and go into the church. Bart said, I think he should get a second opinion, and I mean, that was great. And you mentioned Shane Dye there. I did an interview with Shane Dye before, and I wasn't game to make any comment on the Viander Cross ride.
Well, it's like Malcolm, isn't it? I mean, it's the question that everyone's going to ask.
Of course.
It's with Kingston Town, with Malcolm, it's the same thing, the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're right. Malcolm Johnston, Shane Dye, that they add to the theatre of racing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's pretty unfair to compare older day jockeys to these day jockeys, because they're completely different. Racing's a little bit different to these what was back then.
Well, that's right. I mean, how would Nick Dittman go with the whip rules
Exactly.
today? How would the enforcer go?
Exactly, 100%. Now, mate, I've got a couple of questions for you that you're not going to know that they're coming at you.
Yep.
Gary Harley says you've got an interest in Estee Lauder. Can you...
Well,
Can you
yes.
tell us about that one?
What he means by that is the application of makeup. Well, if I've got shares in Estee Lauder, he has it in Ready Mix because that's what he uses to fill those enormous crevices and cavities on his. There'll be a square up there, Estee Lauder. Has he seen that footage actually of Gary Cleese recently applying it? There'll be a square up, Steve.
I know, Sky Channel can't afford a makeup artist to go around these provincial tracks, and I've seen you apply your makeup. You're very good at it too.
It's not very forensic, I have to tell you. It's a bit slapdash. It's a lot slapdash.
Now, the other question, I know you have to correct me in this one. Where did the nickname Sparkles come from?
Oh dear, I had a feeling this would come up. That happened, it was Victoria Derby Day in 2013. It was. I jumped on Sky 1 at 3 o'clock right after the Derby. Joe McKinnon had done the morning shift from 11 to 3 and then I jumped on. Anyway, the Derby's just been run and won and the makeup lady wasn't there that day, so it was the first time that you had to do it at DIY.
Yeah.
And I'd watched it, but I was a bit unsure of what was going on. Anyway, I'd seen her put this stuff on my lips and I thought, all right, Joe, her name was, lovely lady, I'll do it too. So on I go, yep. So I've come on and well, we've just witnessed the Victoria Derby on one of the great Saturdays of racing, blah, 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 blah. And all I hear in my earpiece is, what expletive is on his face? Get him off, get him off. And I thought, I haven't been on long enough to have offended anyone or used poor language or anything like that. Anyway, the executive producer at the Times burst into the studio and said to me, what is on your face? And I said, what? He said, your lips, they're sparkling. And I said, what? He said, you look like Jeannie Little. I said, Jeannie Little's 5'2", I'm 5'11", you clown. Anyway, but with the sparkle on the lips came, hence Sparkles was born. And I think I interviewed Rod Northam last week somewhere and he said he still remembers.
Yeah, well, I had to do a lot of research to find that one, mate. It's not one that I'm familiar with.
I can't recall who gave it to me, but it had some traction, I can tell you.
All right, so moving forward into the future, what would you like to do left in media, in Sky? Is there any goals that you'd like to achieve, moving forward?
I love what I do and where I'm at. I mean, it's 13 years have gone so quickly. I mean, time goes so quickly, doesn't it? But the last 13 years have gone so quickly, and particularly since I've moved to the Hunter and you've got to know, I just love country people. City people are great too, and I lived in Sydney most of my life, other than the last 7 or 8 years. Yep. But going to the tracks like Scone and Muswellbrook and, this great track here at Newcastle and the provincials like Gosford and Wyong and places like that, I just love it. And when the opportunity arises that Greg Radley takes holidays and I get to do Randwick and Rosehill, well, I love that too. It's a lot more high pressure and Greg is a phenomenal talent and has been outstanding to me since I got to Sky in terms of his tutelage and his advice.
Yep.
Because I had virtually a little experience in television when I got to Sky. But going forward, at the moment I'm so content doing what I'm doing. Every track's within a couple of hours of me. We can go to Sydney to the studio if need be. I don't tend to look too far ahead, which one probably should.
Yep.
Into the future. But for the moment, just having so much fun and meeting so many great people.
We've established you don't like horses, so therefore you're never going to be a jockey.
Or a strapper.
I
mean, can you imagine me walking one around the yard and it arcs up and, gets up on its haunches? I'd be out of there, Steve.
Well, another one of my future projects is to put someone in an uncomfortable situation, see how they react. I might find one for you.
You see, I'm not very nimble on my feet, but if one shied at a fly, I'd be out of there, Steve. I'm pretty nimble when it comes to that.
Have you had a go at race calling?
Well, always wanted to be one. As a kid, I'd go up to the box with Ian Craig as a little kid, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. And in fact, it was at your retirement dinner that Ian reminded me of that. And they were days that I never forgot of going up to the box with him and I'd watch him and just, that mellifluous voice and his accuracy and the colour and the flair. I always wanted to be a race caller. And if I had my time again, I would have had a decent crack at it. I've called a few off the TV, when lines go down or whatever. But when you just look at And Australia's always had the greatest race callers in the world. I don't think that's under any question whatsoever. But the Tapps, the Craigs, your Brian Martin, your Greg Miles, in recent times Darren Flindell, and Matt Hill is a phenomenal talent. And even names that from years ago like Hilton Donaldson. Well, I loved Hilton. I mean, Hilton was out there, and Hilton is the first one to admit that he is still out there. Alan Thomas was a fantastic caller. But as a kid, that's what I wanted to do, was to be a race caller. And I realised that they're getting the sort of money that Flindell is getting now. I'd really have a decent crack at it, Steve.
Well, Gav, it's been absolutely a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm really honoured to think that I'm one of your first people to actually sit you down and talk to you about your life. So I'm really thrilled about that. And thanks again for your time, Gavin Carmody.
Steve, thank you for having me. And as I said to you at the start, if I was going to make my interview debut as the subject matter, there would be no one else I'd rather do it with than you, my friend.
Thank you.
Right.